Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Tuesday, April 4th, 2023 Planning Board meeting. The time is now 7 p.m. This time, I would like to call the meeting to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Duda, if you will please lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I ask for everyone please to pause for a moment of reflection. Thank you. So we are short a regular member, so at this time I'd like to make a motion to have Mrs. Duda as our regular voting member for this evening. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Be 7 voting members this evening. Any additions or deletions to the agenda this evening? And if there are no additions or deletions, if we could get a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion.
Second? All in favor? Thank you. Please take a moment to review the meeting minutes for March 7th, 2023. Once you're done, if we could please get a motion.
I make a motion to accept.
Do we have a second? All in favor of accepting the minutes? Thank you very much. This time, we'd like to move to our first case of the evening. It's going to be rezoning case CZ 2022-001. Rocha. Good evening, Bjorn.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board. This is a rezoning that you saw last month where we presented the information and took public comment, but this was tabled to allow the applicant to be able to speak. Wasn't present at the meeting last month. As a reminder, this is a request to rezone a portion of a large parcel on 601 south of Monroe to take an existing business for landscaping, septic and outdoor recreation construction and bring it to compliance with zoning. Those specific requests is from RA 40 to LI, or light industrial, with conditions. The conditions are shown below. It's effectively the site plan that's already there. It gives a little bit of extra room for future outdoor storage, and that they will bring the buildings and any septic requirements into compliance with the building codes. The actual site plan looks like this. Is the overall parcel to the north. There's a house there right now. It'll remain, the property line will be where the driveway is on the south side, which is where the existing business is located. On the east side of 601 would be the new parcel. Existing conditions, you can see the site with the 2 buildings, fencing along 601. It's near a bulb out. Access point is a little bit to the north. It's where this house is located on the upper left. And to zoom in on the land use for the area, it's largely undeveloped agricultural uses. The orange polygon is the actual future parcel. There are no significant environmental features on the site. It's largely pasture land, no floodplain, wetlands, streams located on it. And you can see the zoning for the area is RA 40, but come up to the land use plan, which is most relevant to this request, which identifies US 601 as an employment corridor, as an overlay to rural residential. Therefore, because of these land use recommendations and the review that's already gone into the site plan, we are recommending approval of the rezoning. The public feedback that was received at the community meeting in January was limited. There were only 2 attendees. We have received some subsequent feedback, concern about the industrial uses already occurring on the site. Those were presented at the meeting last month, and the residents are here as well. And in terms of municipal feedback, because it's more than a mile away from the city of Monroe, we didn't solicit municipal feedback. So again, this is an industrial use. It's near a residential area. That's going to apply almost every time we have a non-residential proposal on the 601 corridor, because it is largely residential and agricultural uses. However, it is identified as an employment corridor. Therefore, this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the site does meet our development standards. So again, we're recommending approval. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Otherwise, we do have the applicant and their representative here to provide more information.
All right, does anyone have any questions for Bjorn at this time?
Can you go back to the camera shots that you had? The one where it says site, is there any way to bring that up bigger that you can see? Or can you tell what's next to that building?
Yep. So you have 2 buildings that have
Yeah,
been
the
built.
one where your cursor is. If you go to the right, keep going, right there. What is all of that? Do you know what that is?
That's equipment, material related to the business operations. So essentially outdoor storage.
Okay.
Any additional questions for Bjorn at this time? Thank you, Bjorn. At this time, I'd like to call the applicant up. Please just state your name and address for the record.
Mr. Chair, Board, my name is Jonathan Meek from Meek Law Firm. I've been representing the applicant since about midway through this process and just before the start of the zoning application. I have Mr. Rocha and his son here today with me, who can speak also in regard to the zoning application and the project. But I was just going to take a minute to speak to the photos that you see there and the overall procedure they've gone through to get this approved. Generally speaking, this property has been one that's been in their family for a while. They have utilized the whole of the property for different things. At a certain point, Mr. Rocha, Carlos Rocha, started a business in this area serving many homes. I would say just about 100 homes a year, setting up septic systems in this local area. So he's basically got a business that serves the local community. And as it started, it was in a different location, and it's made a better opportunity for them to have things in a local centralized place. So that's where this property became the opportunity. They did have some situations early on with trying to get the appropriate means by which to do so. So they've gone through the processes now to get to the point where we've made this application. We do believe that the use of the property for the business that they have, which is a landscaping and septic business, is suitable for that area. And the wonderful thing about them is they are also a landscaping group. So as you see the pictures there is sort of the beginning of what's going on there. The buildings are up, where they are working on getting all of those buildings through the proper coding processes, and I believe we're significantly along, if not completely there at this point in time with those. And you can't really see it that well, but on the site picture that is there, if you look across the front, they've planted, I believe it's about 200 trees. Yeah, about 200 trees that will eventually allow for some blocking from the road of the view that you're seeing there of any of the outdoor actually stored materials. Their design for that is going to be getting trees that are of a height that is going to block from the road, but also add columns to that and other items that are part of sort of the site plan here to beautify the area and make sure that those things aren't as easily seen from the road. And that type of thing. But they do have all of those plans in the works. And one of the things that has been holding them up from taking any major steps towards that direction is making sure that they are properly zoned. So that's the reason for the request today. And if you have any questions of me directly on this, we have had the community meeting. I've tried to field as many questions and answers from the community as I can in regard to what the full plan for the site is. But basically at this point, because they were so far along before this got going and officially got before the board for zoning, what you see is kind of what you get. There's not much extending past the plan except for what we're asking for here under the zoning plan for light industrial with conditions.
Thank
And I'm
you.
happy to take any questions.
Questions for Mr. Meek?
So, how long have they been in business? Since
I'm going to
when?
have to defer. The,
So basically,
you can come forward, Carmen.
I speak on behalf of my dad. So basically, we've been in business, I mean, before the economy came down, we was in business, and then the economy kind of slowed down in 2008, so we had to kind of go work for somebody else and come back and pick up again. But we've been doing landscaping and lawn care for probably since 1999 or 2000. And then we worked to 2008, so the economy kind of slowed down, and, you know, we had to regroup and restart. And basically, here we are, I mean, trying to get things up to code and, you know, try to work the best way possible and making it right.
The company Lego Vista has probably been operating out of this site, I would say, for the last 3 to 4 years at this point in time.
3 to
And
4?
Yeah, 3 to 4 years from this site.
Yes.
But it's been a much smaller operation up to this point. Now they're hitting a point of sort of the rapid growth as we saw through the COVID with just many people like building houses and things like that, and just needing septic systems in the area.
So what stopped you 3 to 4 years ago from investigating zoning this property for this purpose?
Honestly, I believe that the process that they had was just that they thought their use that they had currently was fitting the site, and that most of their equipment and things like that were stored off-site. When this came about, there were multiple maps drawn of this area to try and make the use appropriate. There were multiple, I guess, attempts to get it corrected to this point. And then when I think the reason we really started this and the reason they made it their way to my office was those were failing, and it ended up in a violation letter and a complaint. So when they entered my office, my job was to go through and figure out what actually needed to be done out there to bring them into compliance. Not only that, to get them on the road towards this eventual rezoning application.
Do we have any record of them approaching planning before?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
But I can't fully say that.
I don't think it was planning, if I may, that they approached. I think many of the times it was through, we're going to build this structure or building, so they went to go to the building code enforcement and get those things approved. And those, there was sort of a, I don't want to call it a misunderstanding, but there was an exact understanding of, okay, we want to build this building that's going to produce these, have these uses. It was approved and built, or it was built and then come back, they went and came back and approved it somewhere along the line. There was a lot of confusion through about a 2-year process here that resulted in this.
So these buildings they pulled a permit to build these buildings from the
Mhm.
county?
Yes.
So we have record of that?
I think a lot of them were approved as accessory
Mhm.
structures, not as commercial facilities, and I think that may be what.
That's when a lot of it was approved as a different means, or it was approved under a different guise at the time.
I think they were applied for as residential accessory structures.
Mhm.
They do come over to zoning, but that's, you know, if it says it's a residential accessory structure, that's the code we apply to it, so if it met that code, it was approved. I think the tract is 20, is it over 20 acres?
It's 20, almost 25.
Yeah,
years.
25 total.
So for as far as residential accessory structures, he's allowed unlimited square footage. Typically, it's tied to the size of the house, but it's also tied to the acreage. You got 10 or more acres, you can have an unlimited square footage of accessory buildings. So if they came over as accessory structures, that's how they were approved. We had no reason to question it. I think what happened is actually, there was some conversation maybe the last time they were kind of full of permit about what was being done, and they involved our zoning administrator, who said, wait, that's a
That's
business,
commercial.
not a residential use, and that's kind of how this process started.
And as soon as that sort of moment happened is where I entered the picture, because he wasn't sure exactly what the next steps were. And so I kind of took over from there and started trying to shepherd them through the appropriate processes.
Good.
And we do issue notices of violation. I will say they have been working to try to correct it. we issue the notice of violation, even if they're trying to correct it, just to give the notice, just to get it out there, to say, there's a violation, and you're trying to correct it, that's something.
Okay.
So what do you consider an accessory building then?
And-
Six-car garage?
It could be, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
okay.
you could have, you know, it's flexible on a 10-acre piece of property, because a lot of people that have big properties have toys that they like to use. You know, people who have four-wheelers, or motorcycles, or boats, you know, RVs, and they want a place to store them. But that square footage is down, so if you have a 1-acre piece of property, your accessory building can only be equal to the size of your house. It's a scale issue. But 10 acres or more, you have farms out there that have chicken houses and barns, and this doesn't look a whole lot different than that. So that's the rationale behind it.
I have one more question.
Absolutely.
In that site picture, I see some black stuff in the front of the garages. What is that?
Black stuff in front of the garages. Those, all right, so those are areas of gravel or hardscape materials that are there in piles, I believe.
Not to the side of the building, in front of the building.
So-
It looks like crushed asphalt or stone.
I think it's just gravel and
Yeah.
stone,
So,
gravel
Okay.
and stone.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
And again, just to kind of reiterate, the progeny of it has been kind of a crawl to think, from one project to the next has been kind of what's happening. And so even with their business growing at those times, the accessory buildings, and then the business opportunity has kind of come where they can have this business over there too. So that's when they got kind of that meeting that said, look, we have a business that's operating here, that's not quite appropriate, let's go through and get this zoned appropriately for that type of thing.
I have some questions.
How many employees do you employ now, or do you expect to employ in the future?
I would say it'd be hard to say, but right now, we basically family and have maybe another 4 guys, so we probably a total of 10 people.
Okay.
Right now, it's just most, my dad and my brothers, and two, 3 other guys, that's it.
Thank you.
So is, what I'm seeing here, is that the extent of the building that you're doing, or are you
Yes.
going to do more?
On the building part, I think so, yes. So I think on the accessory building, that's pretty much it for now. We don't see any plans of making anything in other building anytime soon.
Okay.
The-
And as far as commercial, industrial, when something gets cleared or gets prepared appropriately, normally you have buffers and certain landscaping to, I mean, you're in landscaping, but, to help beautify, I guess, is what you want to say, the area. And the other, I'm not seeing that happening here. I know you said you're going to be planting trees. Yeah, I see all of that, but I'm just saying, I'm not sure if they're, and also some of the gravel and the storage that you're doing, if that's going to be better,
It's gonna be
Preserve.
better, how you would say, cover?
okay,
Because we're not sure how we can, what is the one inch from you. I mean, we're planning to make those green giants grow and kind of do a privacy fence, and then probably do some, like columns, and do like a farm, like pieces of wood in between to
Right.
make it better in the front of the trees.
okay,
And that's gonna grow and pretty much cover most of it.
Okay.
We use that gravel to put under the landscaping pavers and that kind of stuff.
okay.
That photo doesn't really do,
Yeah,
I
I mean,
guess, some of
think
it justice.
yeah.
I mean,
It just stimulated some discussion, I
Yeah,
guess.
no, I really agree with
Yeah.
you, and I think that's been there, that's the type of questions that we fielded.
Well, I think it's
continuously.
more concern of debris,
Yes.
of high levels of debris and, garbage and litter and stuff like that.
The things that are there are things that are going to be shipped in mostly either palletized or otherwise.
Okay,
The mounds that you see there are the mounds that are used for underlays on hardscapes.
right,
And so they won't get much bigger than that before they're used, because if they're sitting out, that's not a good thing for those
Right.
types of materials. The other items that you're seeing there are palletized, and will be moved to the site as soon as a project is done.
Got it.
So it's not going to be a storage area for a long period of time.
Okay.
It might be a staging more, I guess is a better way to say it. And then their goal is to put you call them green giants. I'm not the tree expert.
Yeah.
But the 200 trees that are there, okay, will eventually.
That's going to be, that's pine trees, right? They
Yes.
grow quicker, stuff like that?
They're gonna grow quicker, and they're gonna give that block across the
Right.
front. Additionally, it's his plan to put columns and sort of like horse fencing up there and those types of things. There are some plans to do more around the parking also, I believe.
Yes.
So we were making sure that we had the appropriate amount of, the surface wasn't covered improperly out there. So we had the correct amounts of impervious surface for where people were driving up and parking. There will be some additional landscaping that will be going around there to beautify that area. But again, a lot of it was kind of figuring out what direction would happen based on an approval from the board. That gives them permission to go and do the beautification that would be, obviously, to be very clear, it's been a topic that we talked about at the community meeting to make sure, I mean, I'm setting them up to know it and also setting you up to know it that they are a landscaping company and they do a lot of beautiful work. I do not believe that they're gonna want their site to be looking not
Right.
beautifully
Right.
landscaped.
But the million-dollar question is, when a business, especially with 10 people and possibly could be growing, is to do that all on a well and a septic. That's my main concern.
We did already work on that, and we already added on, because that was one of the requirements done. So we did even, I think we even, it's compatible even a little bit more than what we need. I already talked to the environmental health, because it's what I do. So I think we're already up to code on the septic and all that.
Do we have for just my education, do we have light industrial businesses on a well and a septic?
Sure.
And
yes.
we do? Okay,
And-
I don't know.
And staff had the same concern, so before we even brought this to the board, we made sure that they went through environmental health. Environmental health has been on site, they've looked at the septic system, he filed the application and told them how many employees he was planning on having, so they did check all those boxes with the health department.
Okay. Thank you.
John?
Absolutely.
Yes, sorry.
You said that the screening is green giants, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, so Pam, those are 60 feet tall when they're mature, so you won't be able to see into the property when you're driving down. The only reason I know that is they're getting ready to plant 100 of them at my house, so,
And is that 5 years from now, 4 years from
no, they are a fast-growth tree. They're replacing Leland cypresses with this, and I should let Pat talk about it since he's the...
Because nobody wants to see you.
And Pam, just so you know, they have to meet the minimum requirements in the ordinance as far as landscaping goes, so they can't get out of that. Yes, so if the property's rezoned to industrial, then there's a minimum screening requirement anyway that they have to meet. And you had a question about the buildings. Since this is a conditional rezoning and you've got a site plan in there that shows 2 buildings, if they ever wanted to build any more buildings, they would have to come back through this process again. Because they are, if it was approved, they would be tied to that site plan.
The stone and the cinders and all the other stuff that's piled up there, are they going to be put like in bins so that you can't see them like from the road? Even though for now, the green giants aren't going to grow that fast
Yeah.
yet.
Typically, we just put them now in the pallets because we use them, we take them, so basically it's not there at all times.
Yeah, but the big black pile,
Yeah, we eventually.
Can't put that on a
go away,
pallet?
yes. And we can probably keep it where we have minimum less than that, so.
Well, to piggyback on top of that, is there any storage of rubbish on the site?
Rubbish.
Trash?
trash.
Any construction debris, anything like that?
Again, all of the construction and all of the landscaping is not happening on site there. There's basically just staging, preparation, hauling off, and returning. That's generally speaking the operation.
What about, you said the landscape equipment is off-site, or is it there now because of the buildings?
Hey, goes in and comes. I mean, we go do the work outside the business and we bring it, you know, maybe a day, a week, 2 days, depends. We might move it side to side, so.
Do you do all your own maintenance on the equipment?
in
Changing
some cases,
oil and
yes,
filters
in
and
some-
stuff?
I'm sorry?
Do you change the oil and the filters and whatnot on
We pay
the,
a mechanic that goes and do that for us.
does he come to the site to do it?
In some cases, he does. It depends where we have it, and when the maintenance thing is done, he can go to site, he got a mobile unit.
So he takes all the,
Yes.
he takes all the oil and the filters with him?
Yes.
Okay.
There was another case this board heard several months back about a landscape company. There was burning done on site to get rid of various shrubbery and whatnot that they pulled from the site. Is it your intention that there will be any burning of any description?
We hardly ever burn any stuff that we bring from work, not in, or no idea. We basically pay trucking, if you get a big amount, like Norwood Trucking, and they haul by the dump truck or tractor trailer from sites. If we bring anything from Lancaster, like grass clippings or brush, that's basically what you get from 2-3 houses. So that's, pretty much compost.
I was going to say, I don't think that that is a significant, if it was ever going to be something that they would be doing, it would be momentarily to take care of something, but it's definitely not an operation of the business, for sure.
So do you have a compost bin there?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a compost bin?
No. Oh, not at the moment.
So what do you do with your clippings that you bring back? If you,
So.
do you do,
those
do you do basic maintenance or do you do installs?
installs on,
Installs on homes mostly.
yes,
So,
Install-
yeah, it's mostly new installation.
New installation?
yes.
New homes?
Correct. New installation, new homes on, and new installation on like the landscape and hardscape items and septic replacements and that sort of thing. On used homes, I guess, if that's a term.
Any additional questions for the applicant at this time?
I have one more. So, I never want to begrudge anybody for a business or, to make money for their family at all. I'm all about that. But I guess where I struggle, and maybe you can help clarify for me, was this process that you're going through, was this a reactive or was this a proactive? Was it something that somebody squealed and you had to take the next steps, you were going to continue on, your merry way until somebody said something, or it was actually, I think something's going on here that we need to do something more? I'm looking for intention.
Okay. I think the intention was that they weren't necessarily going to use this property as this from the beginning. That's what I've generally gotten from them. There was a gradual movement to it, and I think that that's where we kind of got brought between the two. I think that there was an intent to use the buildings that were put on there just as they were originally scheduled. And then as the business grew, which is very much the point of the letter that I initially put in for the application, is that we had a situation where when home prices went up, we had interest rates that were very low. We had an economy for Lago Vista, their business, that just caused it to boom like crazy. And so what we had was just kind of a perfect storm of what do we do if we need to grow our business and move forward, how do we do this? And they quite honestly just brought it in-house. Like they brought certain things over there and started utilizing property that they had as a home base to make sure that it was working.
No, I understand that, but what got you guys here?
What got us here was there was a dialogue that was already going on with either zoning and or Mr. Jensen's departments in all areas, in all facets, that was telling them that they needed to first look at appropriately mapping the site is the way that I believe it came to. So making sure that they wanted to do some divisions and potentially section this off entirely. Then there were some issues that I know that happened around the buildings, and one was a metal structure. I mean, one of them, I think they both are, but one of them's a metal structure, has concrete underneath it, needed to have certain appropriate permitting that was going on, and there was some discussions about that, and that slowly over time led to the fact that then, once they had gone through those phases with the, environmental in different places, that they ended up in a situation where literally people were out on site and kind of were like, there's a business going on here, right?
So how did Lee get involved?
I think it was at that moment. I wouldn't, that's where.
There have been several different, I guess, processes that we've gone through on this property. One was a division. They divided the property at some point several years ago. And that was fine. It was just a general minor subdivision. And then there was a couple of buildings that were being built that had to have permits. And then, yeah, I mean, it eventually just became apparent that a business was taking place on the property. And that's when we communicated that, hey, you're not really zoned for that. Let's work on, we issued the violation notice, and then, there's ways to go about trying to comply. One of those is trying to rezone the property to bring it into compliance.
Okay.
So that's why they're here.
Okay, and I promise, last question.
No, that's fine.
And this is for Lee. And I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
Sure.
Say it doesn't get approved, say by us, by the commissioners. Does that, what happens to you? I mean, does it go back to RA 40? Do they have to take things down? I'm just trying to understand, and maybe I'm too ignorant sometimes for some of this. I just want to understand what the code is.
So if the board did not approve the rezoning request, and the violation would continue to sort of go through that process, so we would basically say, look, sorry the rezoning wasn't approved, but we still have this violation out there that needs to be corrected.
In addition to that, we understand that we're here with that violation in the background.
Right.
But it's been one of those things that was what really jarred me into gear to help them out.
Right.
And get this before you guys
Right.
appropriately, because I think to a degree there was we're getting information in one place, we're trying to figure this out, and then he came to me and said, can you help me figure it out? And so what I think from that standpoint is we've got, I think, the appropriate plan here that, again, fits hopefully what you guys as a board will view as an appropriate use of the land out in that space. We know that it's on that 601 corridor. We know that there are other businesses. I mean, I took it upon myself again today just to drive out there and see, but we have other businesses along that corridor. We're talking, if you think of 601, you might think it's way out there, but truthfully, this
I know,
is
I live by it. I live near it, so
yeah,
yes.
so there's only a mile or so before you
Yes.
get to the tow truck company that's there,
Yes.
who, in my opinion, has done a beautiful job of, brick walling things in and keeping things from view from the road and that sort of thing. So I think that there's a space out there for what they're trying to do with their business. And I think that the opportunity here is to hopefully come here and not be rejected in this use. If that does happen, I will be standing with them the rest of the time to make sure that they get into compliance, whatever that means from this point forward. And I think that was one of the big concerns of those who were at the initial community meeting was, if they are not approved, what's the next step for them?
Mm-hmm.
And it means that they're going to have to do a whole lot of things to move their business
Right.
and really uproot what they've got going
Right.
on. And in that aspect, I just offer that, they are doing a ton of work in this community. They are a very Union County, very this area centric.
Yeah, I don't
So-
want to ever deny anybody's right to work. God bless you, you are working. A lot of people aren't. I guess my thing was looking at the stretch from RA 40 to light industrial. I understand it's in an employment corridor. I was just trying to get a little bit more understanding as to the business on a well and septic. So
Well,
that's,
stepping briefly into my legal hat, the RA 40, there's not much, there's really no zoning, I don't think, that hits an intermediary for what they're trying to do. So if this was a completely agricultural use, RA 40 would have been okay for it. And there's many, places right around there, farms and such, that have very big buildings and things like that, and possibly big trucks moving all of it and all of that kind of stuff through an RA 40 zone property. What we have here is it's a business type of equipment that's going to be stored outside. It's going to be underneath that. It's going to fit neatly underneath the light industrial use, where it wouldn't at all fit under RA 40, and I think we've, between me
No,
and
I
them, we've
understand.
established that for
I understand
sure.
I'm just saying from
Yeah.
a zoning standpoint.
Yeah, so the understanding here is that now it's to make sure that we are doing this absolutely by the book and in the way that they need to. And to Mr. Jensen's point earlier, they've submitted the site plan. What you see in here is what you are going to have unless it's asked again. And if it's asked again, you have the same ability to approve or deny that you would tonight.
Thank you.
The two buildings, what's the purpose of the two buildings? What are they used for?
Tractors, materials that don't need to get wet, straw, seeds, lawnmowers, and some, pieces of material.
Okay.
Any additional questions for the applicant at this time? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
This time, I'd like to open the public hearing portion of it. We have a return visitor. Mrs. Pincus, if you would please come up here and state your name and address for the record.
Hi, I am Phyllis Pincus. I live in Weddington, North Carolina, but I adjoin this property. I have like 96 acres that adjoin this property. So I oppose the rezoning of this parcel for some of the reasons already stated. They are not asking for permission, they're asking for forgiveness. Even the lawyer letter said to conform the zoning to the current and desired use of the property. So they have been using this for several years with all the reasons they said. You can't see it on these slides very well, but there's piles of debris that grow daily. Off to the right of the shorter building, the one on the left is a 2-story building. The one on the right is a shorter building with like 5 garage doors. And there are pallets 10 feet high, the size of this area in here. There's concrete slabs, which is, I guess, debris from something. And then there's piles of gravel and some other stuff. All on this side of the short building and down to the right. There's also a water truck, and as a neighbor, on all the neighbors, and there are a lot of residential areas, have wells. We all have wells. And I'd like to know where they get their water, what the water truck is doing there. Anyway, the only zoning that is RA 40 is much further down south on Pageland Highway. And those parcels, at least from the road, appear to be tidy businesses related to agriculture. Industry, third reason I oppose this, industry along the corridor, especially near Monroe, is not compatible with the residential uses around this home. They've been in this home for, I guess, about 6 years is when the house was built. So they've owned it 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. Fourth, you should not allow this rezoning so close to Monroe because it will encourage more industry and turn Highway 601 into an unsightly Highway 74, which is a mishmash of congested industrial and commercial. And then Pageland Highway will ultimately need its own bypass. But most importantly, the city and
Because you have 1 minute.
Yes. City and county should be working together to promote residential growth down 601 because it is a mile. I mean, it is adjacent to the largest business district in the county, and that is the medical facilities at Hilltop. The population in this county has grown 4.5 times in the last 50 years. That's more than Charlotte, that's more than North Carolina, that's more than the United States, more than the world. And we are no longer just a small county, a small town county. We need housing. Not industrial activity on main corridors. That's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Pincus.
Any questions? I didn't quite get to everything. I covered it last time.
We were good. Do not have anyone else signed up for public comment. I will ask the question just for what it's worth. Is there anyone else that has not signed up that wishes to speak? All right, at this time, I close public comment. Are there any additional questions for the applicant, Bjorn, or anyone else?
I have a quick question for Bjorn or Lee. So I'm conflicted in this, but how often are rezoning requests coming to us where they were out of compliance And because they did something else, it became a red light, either in, at Diener or DEQ or environmental quality, expanding the septic tank, and all of a sudden everybody goes, whoa, slow down, your property isn't even compliant. And I ask this from a historical perspective because in Weddington, we got uses all over the place there that are not in compliant, and it is a constant challenge.
I can think of a few off the top of my head, but it's the minority. I mean, I think at no more than 2 a year. Of course, we only get approximately 10 to 12 rezonings a year, so it happens. We have examples on 218, Ridge Road, where we had the landscaping that went to RE 200. Here, we've had others that are changes of existing industrial uses and wanting to put additional commercial.
I guess the root of my question is are our ordinances being ignored and abused until somebody's throwing out a flag and saying, time out, this is not appropriate?
I would say this happens, but it's rare. We don't get many violations that turn into a rezoning. We do have violations, and generally, most of them are handled with a letter, and you're out of compliance, and people.
Is it just because the people don't know that they're doing it? That they're out of compliance, or is it, they're just?
It's a mix. Yeah.
I can see a home-based business growing,
Sure.
and all of a sudden you got
Yeah.
3 dual-axle trailers parked in your driveway, and it's,
Yeah.
all of a sudden
We
it's
get,
not.
So it's a
we
mix,
get,
I mean, yeah.
we get calls on people trying to figure out where to rezone land for their landscaping business probably twice a week. Probably twice a week, we field rezoning requests for landscaping companies to figure out what to do with their property because they started doing it at their house. They've outgrown it, or they got dinged by us, and now they're trying to figure out what to do with how to make their business
How to get
legitimate.
that current property into compliance.
Or to find property to make it work.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, and Mr. Berry, in response to your comment and things that Bjorn has said, for about 7 years, I was a member of Charlotte SCORE, mentoring small businesses. And what we found, of all the people that we would interview and try to help start a business, was that the business owner never thought that they would need to go to the county or to the city government to talk to them to find out, okay, here's my plan, what can you do, what can't we do? And so it's a very common thing that we found throughout this area, whether it be in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, it be in Union County, or wherever they come to us from to mentor them. And so that was a very good point and question that you brought up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So that leads me to think about, I know for municipalities, there are business licenses that you need to apply for,
Not anymore.
but, okay.
It's a state
And
thing.
we don't have that for the county.
No.
Nobody in North Carolina has that anymore. That's the statute changed. You can't
Okay.
have a business license, right?
So there's no business licenses, so you don't even know if somebody's coming up with an idea to cut lawns and do stuff.
Nope.
Okay.
We act on a complaint, usually a complaint-driven basis. We get a complaint, we respond to it. However, in certain situations, if someone comes in to apply for a permit, or like in this case, where they, came in and through the course of a conversation, find out, oh, yeah, now we know, so we act on that as well.
Right.
But we don't have inspectors that actively drive around and look for violations.
Yeah.
Our budget's just not that big.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if most people aren't gonna be lucky to know that they're just in residential, much less anything else, and then they go and do something and they don't even know
Right.
because they never applied for anything because they didn't know they had to,
Exactly. Yeah, and that
Yeah.
happens.
like a
And
business
that's
license.
why we generally try to work with people when they end up in a situation like that.
All right.
Any further discussion?
Can I ask the applicant one more question?
Absolutely.
Either the lawyer or the applicant, the lady said that there's a lot of pallets around. Do they ship the pallets back to where they get them from, or what do you do with your pallets?
We bring some back and we take as we need.
I can't hear.
They're saying,
So we take some as we need it and bring some back, but it's not 10 feet tall. That's all I have to say.
there are pallets along that outside, and I think that's where, again, the pallets are where the stone is also, not the piles, but the pavers are also stacked. So there's a section of pallets out there. I wouldn't say it's 10 foot high. It is probably
I mean,
5 or 6 sections.
typically
Do
it's
they
maybe
get rid of them as
one or two pallets high.
they don't need them anymore, or?
Just pile it up, it's gonna be a safety use, it can fall, for somebody, maybe 4 or 5 feet at the most.
But if you're not using them, do you return them, or do you get rid of them?
Yes, sometimes I use them, all the time, so I bring some, I use them, some come back, and I guess if I need to get rid of most of them, I can, it's, the way I, try to, have to make it work. So it's just temporary use while we use it, you see what? So it's not gonna be there like stable.
I see about, as of today, I looked out there.
Here's my picture from today,
Yeah, I've
How
got.
tall is yours?
So,
You got a good picture.
I was going to say, it's about,
12 pallets high.
8 or 12 pallets high and like
90 feet.
1, 2, 3, 4,
Well, that's easy,
5.
like just the pallets,
5
not
sections.
with stone.
That's
Yeah,
60, that's 60 pallets.
It's just the pallet,
Yeah,
the pallets
just
that
about
we
it.
use, we stack
Just-
them and then we just take them back to the
Check. I don't know if I have a good way to show the picture, but anyway, from the corner of the building to here there's different building materials and things like that here. Behind the trucks, there's the pavers and those sorts of things. And then from here to here, this section right here towards the end is where the pallets are. So there's pavers on pallets right here, headed to projects presumably, and then there's a grouping of pallets right there that are used or unloaded at this point in time. So again, they're about 5. I'm seeing about 6 of them. 2 are about 9 pallets high, and the rest of them are about 6 or 8, like 5 or 6, 6 or 8, and a couple.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
I find this a little ironic, to be honest with you, because this business is actually sourcing the development growth of Union County. Because they're doing the landscaping for the new developments and the areas around us. So it is a business that is part of the machine that we're all driving here in this area. So we have to ask ourselves as a board, would we prefer to have this business sitting there within our Union County that is sourcing the businesses that are going on and the development that we're having? Or would we rather see something different in this area? And that's really the question we have to ask ourselves tonight when we vote on this. Does this make sense to be there based on what they're serving in our area? Just something to think about.
Thank you. Well, I would encourage further discussion if you feel necessary. If someone would prefer to make a motion, I would encourage you to use the statement of consistency so we can keep in line with state statute. Find that at the beginning of your folder. It's going to be in the pocket there, but any motion, if you could use the verbiage that's contained just to keep us in the good graces of the state. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion that we approve this based on Union County Planning Board findings that this project is consistent with the Union County Comprehensive Plan and recommends that the project be approved by the Board of County Commissioners with the stipulation that the property owner and business owner takes a look at the comment on the debris comments that Ms. Pincus brought up. So that's the motion that I make.
Now, we have a motion on the table. I have a question on that motion. I guess this would be directed to staff. Being a conditional zoning, if there's a stipulation on here, would the applicant have to agree to that stipulation as well?
Yes, they would.
And I will say, you're making a recommendation, so they don't necessarily need to agree with the recommendation, but ultimately, if the Board of County Commissioners approved it, they would have to agree to whatever was approved by the board. So you can make any recommendation you want.
Right, what happens with all the conditions, all these bullet points here, what's gonna happen before it goes to the Board of Commissioners for rezonings now, for conditional, there will be a Word document that we're gonna type up, an introduction, talk about the rezoning, it's gonna list these conditions, it's gonna have their name, their signature, they're gonna sign to it, agreeing to it, because we can't take conditions forward that they don't agree with.
Well, let's say you recommended a condition that was different than what was on this list, and they didn't agree to it, then you would
Just turn
just,
it down.
in essence, be saying, we don't agree with the development.
can remove our petition,
Yes, they absolutely can.
because they're gonna take the same petition and then
Right.
we either accept yours or add more or.
Or take away, exactly.
So, if the applicant agreed, we'd just add this, we'd effectively add a bullet
Yeah.
point here that they would keep it to the degree of whatever Mr. Fisher's description was of tidiness.
Well,
It's tough to enforce.
If that's gonna be a condition the board wants to consider, I would urge you to come up with some type of dimensional standard or something objective that we can point to in the field and say, you're over a certain amount of storage space, therefore you're out of compliance. Because what's tidy in one person's opinion may be different in somebody else.
Well, Lee, unfortunately, I've not walked the property, so for me to do that would be like
Sure,
shooting a gun in the air,
yeah.
not knowing where the bullet would land and all. I said what I recommended what I did because I understand that you start out with debris in a pile or whatever, and the next thing you know, it can be out of control. Am I right, Patrick?
Absolutely.
And I think that needs to be developed and presented to you guys. Is this acceptable as a planning department? I guess that's where I was coming from.
Well, I would ask, do you trust our development standards and code enforcement? Because that's what we have to refer to.
I think what Don's saying is for the applicant to come up with a place on the plan to show like an outside storage area and define a square footage, and that could be a condition on the site plan, or it could be both. It could be on the site plan and it could be a separate
Yeah,
condition.
what we currently have is this site plan, which shows this outdoor storage area and this built-upon area. This is really future, and this is existing. That's what this dashed area was, and this was on our advice. We said, do you have future development potential? And they said, yeah, and I said, if you don't show it here, you won't be able to do that because you will be limited to this. Therefore, they showed this future area for essentially expanding their material storage so that they could do more work and have a higher capacity in the future. And that's all this is.
I think what we probably need to do is better define that that's material storage and not
Right.
just future development.
Yeah, there's no buildings shown here.
No.
Could you classify this landscape debris and kind of narrow it down?
Do what?
Yeah, I
Could
mean,
we,
it could
could we
be-
just classify this?
It says future gravel and open storage.
Yeah, well, I'm saying not for the future gravel and open storage, but you just classify an area and call it, rather than debris, just landscape debris, because that would kind of narrow it down to natural products, right? Being limbs
It's
or,
not landscape debris.
Limbs
Landscape debris
or-
is gonna be shrubs and
Yeah.
grass clippings, branches, stuff like that.
yeah, I
This
mean,
is all stone and stuff that they use.
yeah, exactly, but I mean, it's still
But I think they should have like,
it's not trash.
they should set up bins and have everything in the bins. Certain areas, doesn't necessarily have to be a bin, but a certain area for all the stuff that, instead of just having it piled up in front of garages.
Correct.
I think just get you a couple dumpsters and stick out there.
Could I know we're down the pike here, but can I ask one last question before we do a final vote?
Sure.
So this is to the applicant. Could I ask why you weren't here last month?
That was absolutely my fault. I took a vacation, and when the board, there was a condition that was being worked on for the property and the environmental, making sure that I think there was a septic approval that needed to be done. That was ongoing through this process and got completed while I was out, and it got fast-tracked, which I very much appreciated, but I was not around to get the notice, and so I didn't notify my clients of the
Okay.
meeting.
Okay, thank you.
So we have a motion. Vice Chairman Fisher, would you like to amend your motion, or would you like to look for a second?
I'd like to look for a second.
Do we have a second for Vice Chairman Fisher's motion? We do not have a second. Do we have another motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve their zoning request as it is for light industrial. This project is consistent with Union County Comprehensive Plan and recommendations that the project be approved by the Board of County Commissioners for the following reasons, being that it meets the recommendation of the county and the comprehensive plan.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. McAteer. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a second. All in favor of the motion to approve? All opposed? Thank you. And Bjorn, if you'd like to fill us in on the next steps?
Yes, this will go to the Board of Commissioners at their first meeting in May for public hearings. We'll be putting the sign out later in the month of April and running ad in the newspaper, and also sending out a notice to the same universe of property owners immediately surrounding this property. If that meeting occurs, the first meeting in May, and everything's fine, action will happen at the second meeting in May.
Thank you, Bjorn. Moving on to the next agenda item. And before we get started on this one, I'd just like to say I would really love everyone's thoughts on this, so please don't be shy speaking up either way. This is text amendment TXT 2023-001 to name a land use board as planning board to also perform duties as a board of adjustment. Good evening, Lee.
Good evening. I think the best way to go through this is to just actually bring up the amendment and just go through that section by section. And that sounds tedious, but
Can you give, just for what it's worth, a little background on
Yes.
why we're here?
yes. So the Board of County Commissioners directed staff, which really boiled down to planning and the legal department, to work on an amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance to consolidate the functions of the Planning Board and the Board of Adjustment into a single board. This amendment will create a land use board as the planning board. The general statutes require that you have a planning board if you have zoning. So land use board would basically become the planning board, but it would also have the duties of the Board of Adjustment. Of course, it's coming to you because of any part of any text amendment. The planning board comments and makes recommendations on any text amendment to the development ordinance. So that's the background. That's the essential piece of it. This is the actual text, these are the changes that would take place, and I'm actually going to jump down and start in section 85. That's where really, for lack of a better term, the meat and potatoes of this section is. Bear with me for 1 second. Okay. So this is essentially right now, if you look at the ordinance, section 85.02, I believe, is the current planning board. So this is the section of the ordinance that establishes the planning board. So that first, that number 1 right there, you just added on a section that where the planning board would be called the land use board, and that it would have the powers and duties of a planning board and a board of adjustment. That's what that first section does. Second, on the next page down here, number 2 really says that anybody who serves on the land use board must be able to perform the duties of both of those boards. So perform the duties of the planning board and the board of adjustment. A lot of these 5, 6 through here, these are just changing planning to land use. So I'm going to kind of run through those. I won't hit on every single change, but that's what the majority of those are. Under quorum and voting, you see a couple of changes there. Again, these are, just saying when they're performing their duties as a planning board, how they have to vote, what type of quorum they have to have. A lot of this didn't really change from the current ordinance. This is just renaming planning to land use.
So there's a board of adjustments now?
Yes.
How many people are on that?
7.
there's
There's
7
five regular, 2 alternates.
And there's 7 of us.
Well, there's 9 of you, so there's 7 regular, 2 alternates on the planning board. There's 5 regular, 2 alternates on the board of adjustment.
So there's going to be only 7.
Right, this new board would consist of 7 regular members and 2 alternates. And that's how this text is drafted now. That could change. If the Board of Commissioners wanted that to be larger or smaller, they could make that change if they wanted to.
So to be clear, though, this essentially dissolves both boards and establishes a new board comprised of 7 regular members and 2 alternates.
Yeah, so there's 2 things that go along with it. And I'll get into the expiration of terms as a different piece. But what this text amendment does is basically renames the planning board to the land use board and gives that board the duties of both planning and the board of adjustment. Again, B, this just talks about when performing the duties of a board of adjustment, how members have to vote. It's essentially the same. It's just talking about objections, how you can abstain from voting. There's different nuances in how abstentions can happen and how people can be removed from voting. Essentially, if one of you had a conflict with an item, you would just ask, and you would state what your conflict was, and the board would vote on it. And if they said, yeah, you have a valid conflict, you would not vote on the item. Typically, you would either come out here or leave the room. Board of Adjustments, slightly different. A board member can go ahead and raise it and say, I have a conflict with an item. Somebody in the audience who has standing. So Board of Adjustments, I'm kind of getting off my script here, but Board of Adjustments operate in what they call a quasi-judicial manner, and quasi is kind of like almost like a courtroom. So it's not quite as formal as a courtroom, but they take evidence. Their decisions are based on evidence presented under oath. It's not based on feeling, or it's not based on your personal preferences. You may not agree with what the applicant wants to do in a Board of Adjustment setting, but if they presented competent evidence and there's no evidence to the contrary, the Board of Adjustment is really supposed to approve that permit or that variance or whatever's before them. So, so getting back to being removed, if a a member was standing, so that could be the applicant or that could be a neighbor. Sometimes there's a determination of what standing actually means, if somebody actually has standing. But if somebody was standing challenges a board member's appropriateness to hear that item, that can be a whole hearing in and of itself. There could be evidence presented on that, and ultimately the Board of Adjustment could vote to say, yeah, I think you need to recuse yourself from this.
But those are prescribed in general statutes.
Yes.
It can't be your house is yellow. I mean, there's a list of what
Correct.
you must
Yes.
be.
Yeah,
I just want to be careful that
Yeah.
when we suggest this, that it's,
Yes,
there
and
is a.
and I'm going to get to all that. When we get down to the powers and duties, this is kind of a new section. This is kind of an old section sort of put together. But this just goes through the powers and duties as the planning board. So since this is a combined board, this would be the powers and duties of the planning board side of it. So really, the planning board is a body that conducts itself in a legislative manner. And you review planning studies, review rezonings, and text amendments, and you acted really in an advisory capacity to the Board of County Commissioners. You review those, you make recommendations. So that's really what this is spelling out. When you're performing the duties as the Board of Adjustment, again, you're acting in that quasi-judicial role, and you hear evidence related to special use permits, appeals, variances. The decisions of Board of Adjustment are final. They can be appealed to Superior Court, but there's no county board that can overturn that decision. So a Board of Adjustment decision can't be overturned by the Planning Board, can't be overturned by the Board of County Commissioners. It can only be overturned by a court. So those are kind of the the two main differences between the two, is the types of things they hear, the way they operate. So the next section, 85020D, again, you got a couple of minor changes here, changing planning to land use. Something that says, we need to make sure the agenda is available to the public. That's just our kind of add in there. So the second one here, number 2, when it talks about the Land Use Board conducting its evidentiary hearings, that's talking about its quasi-judicial role as a Board of Adjustment, because they are evidence is presented, evidence is heard, it's given under oath. And it basically just says that you can adopt rules and regulations governing procedures that have to be consistent with this ordinance. There are rules of procedure. You should have copies of the Planning Board Rules of Procedure. The Board of Adjustment also has rules of procedure. This section talks about conflicts of interest. Again, this section didn't really change because it was already in there for the Planning Board. We added the conflicts of interest when performing the duties of the Board of Adjustment. So slightly different. Again, when you're a Board of Adjustment member, you are supposed to disclose. Again, you're supposed to disclose it if you're a planning board, but an outside person can raise objections. There's also some, they call it ex parte communication. As a planning board member, since you're acting in an advisory capacity to a legislative board, you can talk to people outside of the meeting. I know some of you choose to, some of you choose not to, but you're allowed to do that. So if a developer wants to call you up on the phone and talk about their project, that's fine. They can do that. There's nothing wrong with it, nothing illegal. Board of Adjustment, you absolutely cannot talk to people outside of this meeting because it's evidentiary. A judge is not allowed to talk to somebody on trial, either the plaintiff or the defendant, and you'd be acting in that same capacity. You would not be allowed to talk to applicants or people that were in opposition to a Board of Adjustment case that would be presented in a quasi-judicial manner. So we get into your quasi-judicial role. The first section really talks about how you're acting in a quasi-judicial role. The second section here talks about the board, the chair of the board administering oaths to witnesses. So whenever you have a case, the board swears the people that are going to be providing testimony in, so you're sworn in, so any evidence you present is sworn testimony.
Does the Board of Adjustment currently have counsel?
Yes, they
Who
do.
is it? Is it
It's
outside or is it
Derek, it's outside.
And I'm assuming that that would continue when they're acting in that
I would, that would be my recommendation, that continue, yes.
It's not, the county's attorney wouldn't serve in that role.
No, Board of Adjustment has outside counsel. It's, can you help me out with the name of the firm?
Yes, it's Derek Thurman.
Derek
who
Thurman,
actually-
yeah.
I don't know, can't remember the firm now.
Yeah.
Your question was, actually, the inside attorneys for the county can serve in that role. We have determined that they can, in fact, serve as the Board of Adjustment attorneys. That has not been decided, and I doubt it will be anytime in the near future, but it is a possibility that inside counsel could serve that role.
So number 3 here talks about how you handle evidence. So much like a judge, you can exclude any evidence that you want, any testimony that's deemed incompetent, irrelevant, is immaterial to the case, that can be ruled on. The 4th section talks about, again, how you, I'm sorry, the 3rd one is how you talk about objections. The 4th is how you handle evidence. So you don't have to accept all the evidence. People have a right to talk, but when you're deliberating as a Board of Adjustment, you can talk about how you weight certain evidence. You can talk about the person that gave it. For example, a good example is somebody, special use permit for some use that may be a big traffic generator, and you have a traffic engineer that provides evidence in the form of a TIA that, and they give competent, they're an expert in their field, they're a transportation engineer, they're presenting that. I'm not an expert, I'm not a transportation engineer. My background is more land use planning. I would say Bjorn would probably be a competent witness in a transportation setting. I probably would not be. And there's other people who would probably be less competent than even me. Those folks are not necessarily, so you could weight those different types of evidence, you could weight those differently. You could have a heavier weight to somebody that's providing expert testimony. And that's one of the things that the applicant should, when they are presenting, should give their background, their credentials, and talk about why they're an expert in that field, so you have that information when you're providing weight to what they're telling you. The 6th part down here is really talking about decisions and how those decisions have to be delivered to the applicant. They have to be written, they have to be provided to the applicant. Let's see. Evidence and testimony, this is just, the first part is talking about that, the parties with standing are allowed to present evidence and testimony. Standing, that's an important word. There's a lot of case law around standing. That's one of the reasons why it's important, I think, for a Board of Adjustment to have counsel, because there's a lot of questions that you would want to ask. If you question somebody's standing and whether their testimony should be weighted heavily or not, that's where you need to lean on your counsel to help you through that process of making that determination.
Lee, is counsel at every meeting?
Yes.
That they have?
Yes. Yes. The very last part here is the Board of Adjustment has subpoena power. I'll be honest with you, the Board of Adjustment in my time in Union County has never subpoenaed anybody. Usually if there's an applicant, the applicant comes to the meeting, and people that are in opposition, especially people that have standing that are in opposition, also come to the meeting. There could be situations, I'm thinking if there was a variance case or an appeal where you couldn't get somebody to the stage that maybe had information that was needed, the board could issue subpoenas, but I would say that's probably very, very rare. You probably won't use that section that much. But it's part of the general statute, so that's why it's here. And again, these really aren't new sections. They've just been moved, in generally speaking, from 85030, which is the Board of Adjustment section, into the new Land Use Board. Everything else at the bottom, these are all just, this is the Board of Adjustment section, so you can see it's just a bunch of strike-throughs. So this whole section would be eliminated and reserved for future use and combined in with the new Land Use Board. You see a lot of other changes. Most of these, actually the majority of them, are just changing where it would say Board of Adjustment or Planning Board to Land Use Board. Those are the extent of the text changes. I do want to talk about another section that I think it's important to look at, just so.
Before we go there, can I?
Sure.
I don't want to mix up where you're going with approval or disapproval and kind of stick to the code, if you will. And I don't know whether this is a question for you or Brian, and I'm assuming you're here as the petitioner in this case.
I'm actually here in case the board had any questions, and also to, try and give my understanding of the direction from the board. I didn't feel that Lee and the staff needed to be the one to communicate that.
And I really do appreciate that. So give me some direction. I was not at the meeting last month. I'm sure everybody on this board has read all of the chatter. So before we get to where you are, I need to understand what the goal is.
So it is my understanding from the board members that they believe, or they feel that there is a need to consolidate our boards because there isn't really a regular and routine need for the Board of Adjustment. They meet infrequently. They obviously, you have to have people who are committed to that role, and it does require a significant amount of training. It is quasi-judicial. Oftentimes, those cases do end up in court. We've had a couple of those we've had to deal with, and so it is something that is more demanding than just an advisory committee, which I'm not saying your role isn't important, but it's an advisory role, whereas the Board of Adjustment is the decision-making board unless it goes to court. I think my understanding from the commissioners was that this was a way to consolidate those functions and have one group of individuals serve both of those functions.
How much money are we talking about saving? That's been the
it
chatter is that this has been.
It doesn't save
I did a quick
significant amount of money.
calculation, and it's y'all spend that on cell phones for the county commission.
I did not hear that financially this was a benefit. It does not save a significant amount of money.
Well, the video of the Board of County Commissioners meeting indicated that.
Oh, okay. That was not my interpretation of it.
So we're trying to scale back the size of government. That's what I heard from in
I
the
would agree with
video
that,
of the
yes.
Board of County Commissioners.
Yes.
How is this reducing the size of government?
Again, you're taking two boards and consolidating them to one. I think that's.
I'd like to piggyback off of that.
All right, go ahead.
If I may. To that point, what resources were dedicated throughout this whole process? Again, we're reducing the size of government. Did we just arbitrarily throw this together? Because it looks like there's a fair amount of work.
So the resources were, first our attorneys got involved and had to look at what was the requirements under general statutes. Could it be done? Absolutely. So they investigated that side of it. Then they met with our planning staff to actually draft particular changes to it. So a significant amount of time and man hours went into investigating this.
So
I can't give you the number because I didn't calculate them.
would you consider that reducing the burden on government?
I would not consider that particular function was a reduction. Absolutely not. But we often do a lot of research in order to accomplish board goals.
May
That
I
is
ask
not
a
uncommon.
question?
Yes.
So, on that point, so they did their research.
Yes.
How many other municipalities in Union County or even in North Carolina have consolidated the boards, and has somebody talked to them to see if it's been a successful endeavor?
Sure. So I know there was some research done. I don't have that in front of me, but I believe it was a very small number of counties and municipalities that have a combined board. I want to say it was less than a handful that actually do it that way. I don't have the exact number, but it is a small number compared to 100 counties and the over 500 municipalities that there are in North Carolina. I don't think it was a large percentage that do it this way. As far as whether or not they were contacted, no, there was no contact for those to find out how it works, how it doesn't work.
Thank you, and I'd like to apologize to Mr.
keep
Berry
going,
for
keep going.
cutting in the middle of that, so I'll yield to him.
No, keep going, I'm fine. You can come back to me later.
You're too kind.
What was the commissioner's vote count on that? 3-2?
3-1.
3-1.
3-1, I
Okay,
believe
well,
Commissioner Helms was
six.
not present at that time, so it was 3-1.
It's kind of figured.
So in all this talk of merging the planning board with the Board of Adjustment, what has yet to been identified as the fundamental problem with our current structure?
Again, I will go back to what was communicated, and then that was the board felt that there was a unnecessary burden placed on a small group that meets infrequently. And they felt like one group could adequately perform both those duties.
So you mentioned burden. Are the members of the Board of Adjustment volunteers as we are?
They are,
So
absolutely.
they signed up for this?
They did.
So would you consider it a burden if it's something that you volunteer for?
I personally,
Yeah, I'm
I
not to put you on
understand.
the spot. I
Okay.
know you're glad for punishment coming here, so I do appreciate you
Sure.
coming here in the first place. So I understand one county in the top 30 counties population-wise in North Carolina has a combined board. Is that your understanding as well?
it's a very small number. I don't know the exact number, but I said it was a handful, and I think it's probably a handful if I had to guess total.
And I've heard that the justification for combining the boards oftentimes is they do not have enough volunteers to fill these positions for both boards. Is
That
your
can be,
understanding as well?
absolutely. That can be a challenge.
Do we have that challenge here?
We do sometimes have a challenge with getting additional individuals interested in applying for boards and committees. That is common for a lot of
These
them.
two particular boards, do we have issues?
Yeah, occasionally, we will have a lack of interest in applying for some of our boards. And specifically, I know that we have had some challenges in the past, I can't say more frequently, where we would not have any additional candidates other than the individuals who were asking to be reappointed. And I think the board does like to see sometimes new blood on boards. They like to be able to cycle people in that have different views, have a different, perspective. And we have had in the past where we have a reduced number of folks outside who are applying versus those who reapply. I can't say that that's common,
For
like, within the last 2 years or so, but I can say in the past, when I was here, we had
Well,
those challenges.
If I'm gonna take the ball, I'll throw you a lifeline.
That's all right. I'm answering your questions the best I can.
The senior, I want to call it gerontology, that board consistently has. And there is a precedent set with the direction the county commission is going, but I don't know if I'm sure you were here when the Health and Human Services Board was disbanded. The Fire Board was disbanded, and reconstituted after the litigation ended. So there is, my fundamental question is, you have a quasi judicial board and a non-policy making advisory board.
Correct.
One can very easily go away. I mean, the planning board can go away like that because it's unnecessary. Our petitioners go straight to the Board of County Commissioners and retain the Board of Adjustment in its current function as a quasi judicial board. And that's just a comment.
So the planning board actually has to exist. Now, now that doesn't mean that the Board of Commissioners can't serve in that function. They certainly can serve it. They can't serve as the planning board? They can serve as the Board of Adjustment. That's right, that's right. They can serve as the Board of
Any
Adjustment.
board can serve as a board of adjustment, but you have to have a separate planning board.
Right. So because we have land use standards and because we have ordinances, the planning board has to exist in order to be able to give an advisory recommendation to the commissioners. So the Board of Adjustment, honestly, the commissioners could serve in that role if they chose to.
So it's a state statute that establishes the planning board. And the spirit behind that is essentially to provide other voices, other opinions,
Yes,
and generate some discussion there.
absolutely.
Even voices that people may not want to hear.
I think their voices, period.
Thank you.
So and to reduce government, I mean, it seems to me if the Board of County Commissioners can serve in the role of Board of Adjustments, there you go.
I mean, they certainly could consider that, and honestly, that might be an option for them to take up. When we present this to the board, once the board has given a recommendation, that is your role to give a recommendation. Once the planning board has given a recommendation, that is an option that they certainly can consider. Until they adopt an ordinance change, there's no change in effect until they adopt it, and they can always choose that as an option if they wish to.
I have another question. As far as if we do say we go forward with the land use based on the new organization.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know the process by which they would select the members? Because how I understand it now is, because like I did, you fill up an application, you tell a little bit something about yourself, and so I'm just curious how they go about selection.
So it's my understanding that the board would follow the same process. This board would still be in effect as well as the Board of Adjustment. And what our recommendation is, if the board is going to change the ordinance, if they decide to make that change, they make that effective date someday in the future. They then advertise for those positions, much like we do for any other board. We advertise that those are available. We take applications. Anyone interested in that position would apply. The board would then take those, review them, and make a decision and constitute that board. The chairman actually asked a question earlier, and he was correct. It would be they would be creating a new board with new members. It could be made up of all of the planning board members as you exist, some of you, none of you. I don't know any of the answers to that, but obviously the board would have to take applications and make that decision.
Do we know the criteria by which they select?
To be honest with you, that is an individual decision.
It's more subjective.
It's their opinions on whether they feel those individuals fit that role.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
It's the same way you got here today. And if you look at the advisory notice of consistency and reasonableness we're asked to vote on tonight, if the Board of Commissioners takes it up and approves it at its next meeting, our terms end immediately. So
So technically, go ahead, Lee.
it says the effective date of this ordinance notwithstanding any other provision.
Right.
So it's pretty explicit.
And I wanted to talk about, that leads into these three items here. The first is just that, if the board approves it, this is the approving ordinance language. So anytime you approve a text change or a map amendment, you have to.
I'm not
adopt
done with
it.
the first part, but you're more than welcome to keep going through
Sure.
this.
So number 2 on this list is probably the most important. This essentially says that upon the effective date of the ordinance, all the terms of the planning board and the Board of Adjustment will be accelerated and will expire. So essentially you won't have any members. What Brian's suggesting and what we have sort of internally talked about is setting that effective date out in the future. That's not in this draft. This is the latest draft that we have from legal, but I think that is what Brian is kind of suggesting, is that effective date be pushed out into the future and not become effective maybe the night that it's voted on.
Yeah, because then what happens? Then zoning and anything that comes forward before you guys kind of sit idle until you finally have
You would
folks?
essentially, if the ordinance was effective the night it was adopted, you would essentially have a land use board that had the powers of the Board of Adjustment. It just wouldn't be populated with anybody. So you would technically be in compliance with state law because you would have a board. You just
Right.
wouldn't have any people serving on that board.
So then everything, is.
But that, I want to, I want to make clear, so Leah's saying if the board took action where they made the ordinance effective the night they voted on, that would be the case. We're not recommending that. If the board wants to take action, we would recommend that they make the date effective some point in the future. The current planning board and current board of adjustment would still serve in your roles until the point at which that effective date was. Let's just say it was July 1. I'm going to throw that out as a date. I'm not saying that's the date, but if the board said this ordinance is effective July 1, then that means the planning board, board of adjustment would still serve in your role. You would still listen to cases. You would still serve that role until July 1. During the time between now and July 1, or whenever the board takes action in July 1, that's when the board would take applications, they would review, they'd make a decision on who would constitute that board. Absolutely, and that's why I'm recommending, well, and that's why I'm recommending that there be a later effective date, because you do need an overlap, absolutely.
Yeah, essentially, number 4 on this list would change to have a date in the future. Of course, then again, that's up
to the board, that's up to the board.
Decision.
They could say no.
Yeah.
That's the recommendation we would give them, if they choose to make a change.
I'm just confused as to why this became such a hot priority.
I don't have an answer for that. I would certainly talk to your commissioners. I'm not sure.
No, I can bet that it has something to do with the Lucas Lands transaction, but.
Vice Chairman Fisher?
Mr. Berry, I had that same question at the last meeting, and I asked for a group of questions to be answered at this meeting by Mr. Jensen. Example, has anybody looked at the data for the last 5 years to the number of BOA cases? In other words, this, to me, in business, as you well know, being a consultant, you make recommendations based on facts, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What facts did we do this? What did we look at factually? I mean, you say it's a handful. Lee, how many did you tell me earlier tonight?
So, in the past, in that time period, the planning board had 39 meetings and decided, or made recommendations, I should say, on 63 separate items, from rezonings, text amendments, and of course the comp plan was included in that. The Board of Adjustment met 27 times, that's 27 meetings, and they decided 36 cases. Those were mostly special use permits. There were a few variance requests and a couple appeals in there as well. So I think to answer your question, 63 cases were heard and recommended by the planning board, and there were 36 cases heard by the Board of Adjustment. That's over a 5-year period. Yeah. And then Don, you had also asked me about the kind of the duties between the two boards. And I sort of already touched on that.
You've done a good job of that.
The planning board's role, review planning studies and amendments in an advisory capacity to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Board of Adjustment sits in a quasi-judicial manner to decide those evidentiary hearing type cases. And there's no board at the county that can overturn that. The only people that can overturn that would be a court system.
The other thing that we talked about, and I believe you said, well, one person's this could be another person's that, but did you come up with any pros and cons of why we should do this or why we should not do this?
Well, I think you've kind of discussed a lot of those amongst yourselves. I think you've talked about the quasi-judicial role being different from the legislative and advisory function that are is served by the two different boards. I think you've talked about finding people to serve on those boards, whether that's an issue or not an issue, and just the training required to of the two different boards. There's a lot of training required of the Board of Adjustment to kind of understand the different, how you handle evidence, how you hear cases, how you're recused from cases, how you interact with applicants, and how that's different from the planning board. And then, I think Brian mentioned some of the boards, the Board of County Commissioners, about reducing the number of people, I guess, that are serving in that capacity. So again, I think those are items that you've kind of discussed. I don't want to come up with a list of pros and cons, because my list of pros and cons might be different from yours. But, and I think that's ultimately what goes into your decision when you're looking at the statement of reasonableness and consistency. That's really not just this, but a rezoning case or anything else. That's really a pros and cons list for recommending approval or denial.
And I think, it behooves you as the planning board to give the pros and the cons that you feel the Board of Commissioners should consider in making this decision. That's what you do as an advisory board anyway. When you make a recommendation for any rezoning or any text change, you give your opinion on what you think they should evaluate that on. And I think that's what you should do tonight, or whenever you make that decision, you should give them those things to consider.
Lee, give me those numbers again. Planning board over 60 months was what?
Planning board was 63 cases, and Board of Adjustment was 36, was the reciprocal of that.
So I've got a question for my fellow board members. The time is now 8:36, 8:37, and we will drag this on as late as it takes for everyone to speak their piece, get their questions answered, and so on and so forth. We also have memories of several of these board meetings that have continued well into the evening historically. Along those lines, how would you feel as a board if you had one of those late nights on the planning board, closed session, close your planning board session, and then jumped right into quasi-judicial hearings?
Where I'm struggling with is, in the late nights, that could be an issue. But where I'm struggling with, aside from the, I really didn't know about this until it was kind of handed to me tonight, sort of the quickness of it. But if I was on the board of this, you'd have to switch hats. And that could be difficult. And then if I'm in a situation where I'm supposed to be on the Board of Adjustment, but I didn't have my right hat on and somebody wanted to talk to me about something, and I violated that because I'm in this role where I can switch. And that might be difficult. Because on the one hand, you're a little more free with the planning board, but then with this other board, you really have to be on top of it. So it can be tough, especially when you got to switch it in the meeting where you're, on the one hand, you're an advisor, you understand that role, and then you're switching. Okay, now, that opinion isn't worth anything. That I can't consider that. I have to strike that from the record, kind of in a court, and that can be very tough to sit with.
Also, how's this going to get communicated to the public? Because following that line of thought, if you're struggling getting people to sign up for committees now, you add this complexity to some other people. First, you gotta explain it, what it means, and then it does seem a bit more cumbersome, I would think, and I would think, I don't know, I would think twice too, like he said, switching hats, and, okay, there's training involved, and that's great, but it does, I guess I'm struggling a little bit with that too. It just seems in conflict with some things.
Certainly a valid concern, absolutely.
For the Board of Adjustment, what is the training? What do you have to go through?
We generally try to provide training once a year to both boards. If you remember, I think it was this past summer, we had a training session with the School of Government for the Planning Board. We also did one of those for the Board of Adjustment. So we try to go through training once a year. Sometimes we'll do it We generally like to bring in somebody from the outside. I know a few times Central Carolina Council of Government has done it. We've had the School of Government do it. The Board of Adjustment has also just had their council do it as well. So there is training involved.
I just wonder, this is my mind churning, I'm just wondering how much forethought was actually put into this before y'all were asked to do what you've done, which I think y'all are to be commended on the work and the short amount of time that you've had to work on it. I don't see the research. It hadn't come to me yet, Brian, the research that the Board of Commissioners put into this to come up to make a decision on it. I'm sorry, I'm not being critical. I know I'm going off the board.
Sure. It's a valid question. Honestly, the board did not express to me how much research they did in directing us to accomplish this.
Because didn't you say that Cabarrus was the only municipality in our area that?
Out of the ones that we looked at, again, I didn't look at all 100 counties or 500 plus municipalities in the state, but out of the counties that we have a handful that we'll generally look at that have similar characteristics to us. I want to say Cabarrus was the only county that I saw that had a combined board. I'm not going to say that is the only one that's like us that existed. That's the only one I can recall at this moment.
Thank you, sir.
I think there were 2 towns maybe in Union County that also had combined boards, but towns are a little bit different.
Well, they have the same membership, but 2 boards.
Right.
So they convene as a planning board and they convene as a
Yeah.
board of adjustment.
But same membership.
Same members.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to look it up online and do some research on my own behind the scenes, and it was hard to just get any information anywhere.
It is.
It's very cumbersome to try to get any government information.
So to piggyback on what Robert and Pam were touching on earlier, so what happens if say, for example, you have a case goes before the planning board and you provide whatever advisory capacity you need to on that one, goes to the county commission, they take action, say they deny it, and they decide, well, you know what, we're going to change your plan around a little bit and go for a variance instead. And then you're brought back before that same board of the same people who've already stated their opinions. Is that not grounds for an appeal? When you're asking someone to be in a quasi-judicial capacity when they've already stated their opinion, it seems like there'd be a conflict of interest there.
I'm not going to say there is or isn't. Honestly, that's a question for our legal team. All we know is general statutes allow this. So it is a function that obviously the General Assembly has recognized can occur. Obviously, on a case-by-case basis, there can always be a situation where it could turn into a conflict, but I can't answer specifically in that scenario, is that a conflict or not? But it certainly is an opportunity.
Well, to that point, and some other points I've heard here, it just sounds like it's not really well thought out. It sounds like this is the answer to a question that no one asked.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Brian, is it the Board of Commissioners' request that you have a determination from us tonight?
It is my understanding that they would like the planning board to certainly make a determination. Obviously,
Are you trying
this
to
is
get
your
it on an
choice.
agenda in the next month, or is this?
Our typical process is that if the planning board were to make a recommendation tonight, it would go on the first meeting in May for a public hearing. Generally, the way they handle their public hearings is if there's opposition, then they do not make a decision. They wait for their second meeting of the month to make a decision. However, if there is not opposition, they can take action. That's their choice. But it's usually first meeting of the month is the public hearing, second meeting of the month is when they make a full decision. And my understanding is, and Lee, correct me because I'm a little out of this a little bit, but there is a statutory time limit at which the item will go automatically to the Board of Commissioners if no recommendation comes from the Planning Board. I don't remember what that time frame is, but I believe there's some limit that if you choose not to take an action, it goes to them, and then they can take whatever action they want without a
I
recommendation.
think they can take it anyway, right? Because we're an advisory board.
They can make their decision regardless of what your
What we do.
recommendation is, but there's a time frame at which you're allowed to make that recommendation.
Right.
After that, then all bets are off. It goes to them. They can do what they want to do.
Right.
Yeah, any amendment has to come to the planning board for a recommendation, but that's correct. There is a time frame that you have to make a recommendation, and if no recommendation comes forth, the board could just then take it up without a recommendation.
Well, this is my opinion that the way this thing came about so fast, I don't believe any of us sitting here are going to be a part of that board. And the current people sitting on the advisory board are not going to be a part of that board. There's a plan, and there are people that they want in that place. So, you know, I guess they're going to do what they will, but I know which way I vote on this tonight.
I would like to get more information, actually. The question I asked earlier about talking to the one or the two or the three municipalities or whatever that have done this, I would like to get more information from them of what they think the pros and cons are, because then I can make an educated decision on maybe this does work and maybe it doesn't. But I don't know. I need some history. I need to know that there's people that are out there that have actually tried and true this, because otherwise we're going to stub our toes, we're going to look like crap, and that's not what we want to do in front of the public. I mean, I don't even think they understand what half of this is going on. So I would like to get more information. I would like to know folks that are already doing this. You know, that's what my recommendation would be. We get more research on that, and then we have more, and then we can make a decision.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
You know, I'm going to reminisce a little bit, and I hope that y'all will bear with me and this comes out the way I hope I want to say it. In 2014, I went on this board, and I remember Everett Medlin making a comment a few months after about how well that board was working together. It was Everett, Jim Howie, myself, Russell. I don't remember all the people that were there. And that board continued to grow. Brian, you took us and you gave us things to work on. You got promoted, Lee came in, same thing has continued. And this board right now means a lot to me. Each of you have stepped up to the plate. We've had disagreements, but we walk away friends. We've done everything kind of the way I feel that epitomizes the Rotary four-way test. We've looked at the truth. We tried to be fair to all concerned. We've tried to build goodwill and better friendships by making the right decisions. And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And all concerned is the citizens of Union County as well as the Board of Commissioners. And I know for a fact that Jerry Simpson, past chair of the Union County Board of Commissioners, he lives by that on a daily basis. And I happen to agree. I don't see how we can make a decision tonight, because if we do, it's like taking a dart and throwing it and hoping it hits the balloon somewhere out there in outer space. And I think we're doing the citizens of Union County a disjustice. And I think you've got a very valid point, what you said, Jeremy, and all. But I had to say it. I might be the most despised person in the world tomorrow morning, but I think it needed to be said. And I thank you, Brian, and I thank you, Lee, for the leadership that you've given us. But I think that, you know, if we got three people right here that tonight was the first night they saw this because of some mishappenings on the agenda and things of this nature, which those things happen. I just don't see how I think it's wrong for any board of directors in a corporation, board of commissioners in a town, in a county municipality, or at the state government to do some of this. And that's from the bottom of my heart. And if I'm wrong, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize to you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. You wanted to, I'd like to make a motion unless you were getting ready to do something, if you had more discussion.
Before you make a motion, I've got a question. I don't know if you have a question.
I agree with Jeremy. I think whatever we do, it doesn't matter. They're going to do what they're going to do. That's my feeling.
My question, and Brian or Lee, if you could answer this for me, should we vote to defer so we could get additional information? And our board members could do a little additional research so we could provide what would be a worthwhile opinion.
This is my personal opinion. I'll give you my personal opinion. Your role is an advisory board. That's your role. And if you feel like you need additional information in order to give a good recommendation, whether it's for or against this, then that's what you should do. That is your role.
My question is more in terms of time frame.
And honestly, there is not a looming deadline that this has to occur. I will tell you, the board obviously would like to make a decision, but it doesn't have to happen tonight or tomorrow or next week for that matter.
But by the procedures, if we say we vote to defer, would our time expire to make a call on that before the next planning board meeting is scheduled to commence?
No, once it's presented to the board, you have 45 days to make a recommendation.
So I think it's disingenuous to suggest that this isn't redlined when it was mentioned for the very first time 6 weeks ago, less than 6 weeks ago. And we now have a text amendment that has been through 2 sets of lawyers' hands to deliver to us. And frankly, I read it for the very first time at 6:45.
Right.
I'd read the original agenda and it wasn't included.
No.
So, you know, for it to go from 0 to making a decision, and I'll be generous, 45 days. And then to turn around and say, we don't have a real big agenda to get this done, that's.
No. I'm
not
telling
buying
you
that one.
my opinion. I said my opinion.
Well,
There is not a rush
County's
that you have to
attorney
get done.
works for you and the commissioners, so for them to do this work and get it in Lee's hand and into our packet in 45 days, somebody hit the go button. It wasn't just y'all go take a look at this and come back to us with some ideas.
I mean,
That's just disingenuous.
You
Brian. Come
asked
on.
me a question earlier, and I answered it clearly, that I believe the board wanted an answer tonight.
So given that, I'm going to give the board an answer tonight, because I've only had a little bit of time to read it, and I'm going to, Mr. Chairman, if I may enter a motion, whatever the second motion is, I recommend denial of the ordinance approving the text amendments, and I'm not going to read the entirety of it. It's there for you.
We have a motion to deny. Do we have a second? We have a second. All in favor of the motion to deny this text amendment? All opposed? That is unanimous. Before we continue, I want to thank Lee, and I especially want to thank Brian for being a good sport in all of this and taking the abuse well.
Part of my job.
This was not abusive. Pointed.
My apologies, I didn't mean to abuse you.
All right. Moving on to the planning staff report.
Haven't really had any business since last time, so there's no staff report.
Very good. Well, that's nice. Brief comments. Mr. McAteer.
I enjoyed it.
Mrs. Duda.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Don for his service and for being a very good mentor to me, for being kind and for always doing the best, not only for us, but also for the citizens. So good luck to you. We'll miss you.
My pleasure.
Mr. McNally?
Yeah, I want to echo Don. It's been a pleasure to know you. I think I've been on the board, I don't even know, about 2-3 years, something like that. But it's been a pleasure to know you've been a real leader for the board, and hopefully we'll be able to carry on. We'll see.
Mr. Harrison?
Ditto. I miss that empty chair.
Mr. Berry?
Don, it's been a pleasure. It's only been a year, but it's been a joy to work with you. And Brian, thank you for coming tonight. I know this probably wasn't the best thing you wanted to do on a Tuesday night, but I appreciate, I'm up for, I'm a one-year term and sent my application in to Lynn a couple of weeks ago, so I guess I got to send her an email and tell her to send it back to me. But, so I was we didn't kill each other. We've been on here for a year.
You put your application in again?
Yeah.
Crap, that means I gotta put up here for another year.
Vice Chairman Fisher?
Yes. No comments.
No comments. I would like to close by saying, so for anyone who doesn't know, and this goes to anyone that may be paying attention online, this will be Vice Chairman Fisher's last meeting on the planning board. He's retiring. He's given it, 9 years? 9 years of service to this community, and that's huge. On a personal note, he has been a mentor to me now for 2 years since I assumed chairmanship of this board. And I can tell you, I could not have done this without him. Prior to each meeting, we have conversations and sometimes a meal and just discuss the nuances and how do you approach this and what do you think we're going to encounter here and what would you do in this situation? And he's been just a beacon of wisdom, and I could not ask for a better mentor on this board, and I will truly miss you, Don.
Yes, you, man.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a comment?
Yes, sir.
So I do, first off, I know that this was not a task that you wanted to be able to have to comment on and make a decision on, and I appreciate that you did deliberate on that. We will express to the board your concerns that you raised, and the concerns are valid, and we will explain that to the board. No decision has been made, and I can't say what the decision will or won't be, but we will do our best to make sure the board has good information to make a decision on. So I just wanted to put that out there because you did express some valid concerns, and the board should be aware of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Mr. Vice Chair?
One more comment.
By all means.
I failed to say this earlier, and I apologize. This is not bragging. I served this board as chair for 2 terms, vice chair for 2 terms, and I want to thank Amy, because I tell you what, this lady has worked herself to the bone. She put up with me with phone calls. I can't do this. How do I get into my email? On and on and on. And she always did it with a smile on her face and laughing and having a good time, and to repeat again. None of this would have happened if it hadn't been for you guys, and a special thank you to Brian Matthews and to Lee Jensen. Guys, y'all are top-notch in my books, and all y'all are too, and I wish you the best in everything you do, your personal life, your family life, business life, whatever it is, because the best is yet to come. Thank you.
And since you're going to be leaving this board, would you care to make the motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Thank you and have a good night.